The conclusion of Gojo's character is arguably the most controversial thing to happen in Jujutsu Kaisen. Some hated it, some loved it, some still don't think it's the end for his character, and while I've addressed both the praise and backlash for this potential conclusion on the channel before, what I haven't done is take a look at the possibility of Gojo's return and what that might mean for the story of Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole. In this video, I hope to discuss not if Gojo will return to the manga, but why him doing so might be a great or horrible decision for the series moving forward, based on what his character has meant to the story up to this point, and what his return might signify for the series in the future. To quickly address the elephant in the room, I think it's very possible that Gojo comes back. It's not necessarily likely, but considering the ambiguity of Gojo's demise and the manner in which he passed on to the next life, I think Gege granted himself a little bit of safety to pull the revival card if necessary. The more interesting discussion to me centers around whether or not he should come back rather than if he is going to. Gojo is one of the most beloved and structurally well-written characters in the story, so I can understand why many think that him returning to the series after dying the way that he did would only improve it. However, I'm not so sure. Satoru's character leading up to this point has primarily been predicated on two things: his strength and his attitude regarding it. While he is not exclusively these traits, many of the complex or nuanced ideas that spring from his character can all be traced back to his overwhelming dominance as the strongest and how he felt about holding the weight of that title. His loneliness, his desire to teach and foster a new generation, his lackadaisical demeanor, all of these things stem from the aforementioned traits, and I would argue that they all came to a head beautifully in his fight against Sukuna. I've talked about that fight at length on the channel, and I don't view it as the perfect battle or even the best in the series. However, for Gojo, for his narrative specifically, Gege crafted an amazing conflict and resolution. The feelings of worry, tension, excitement, and joy all bubble to the surface and beyond for Gojo in this battle, as Sukuna was a strong enough opponent to take on all of those attacks and all of that passion and more. The body he trained, the cursed energy he refined, the ingenuity that he was gifted, everything that Gojo Satoru, the sorcerer and human, had ever built was thrown at Sukuna, and in his own words, what was left over was not regret. Many argue that Gojo still hasn't fulfilled everything that he desired, and this is an entirely true statement. Megumi is not safe. He doesn't know about Toji. He won't live long enough to see his students grow up, and he wasn't able to reach Sukuna in the way that he desired. If this truly is his end, Gojo didn't even get to lay the body of his closest friend to rest. From this perspective, I entirely understand why people think that Gojo's mission isn't over. His journey is not yet complete, the battle has not yet been won. But to those very people, I ask you this: what sorcerer ever has gotten to say that in this series? What character in Jujutsu Kaisen has set the precedent of total completion in their ambitions? Nanami died unable to safely retire. Geto died unable to achieve his goals of eradication of all non-sorcerers. Yuki couldn't kill Kinjaku or see her plan come to fruition. Yaga was unable to see his son one last time before his death. All of these characters, all of these sorcerers were confronted with death before they were ready, before they could accomplish everything they set out to individually. From the very beginning, this curse is said to hang over everyone that dons the name of sorcerer. Satoru may be strong, he may have been the strongest of his era, but a sorcerer he is still. To have him be exempt from the cruelty of the title is to ask the story to favor him, to unequally decide to save him in a way that isn't totally necessary. Because despite all of the tragedy that can come with death and going before you have accomplished everything that you wish to, there is hope that can be found in it as well. Nanami died at the hands of Mahito, sure, yet he left everything up to Yuji and passed on. Geto died unable to achieve his goals, yet his allies, both new and old, continued to exist despite that. Yuki couldn't see the world she envisioned come to fruition, but in her death, she gave Choso the gift of humanity, and the rest of her allies the knowledge she had acquired throughout her entire life. Even Yaga, a character who in the grand scheme of things doesn't hold the same narrative significance that the others mentioned do, was able to place his curse on Gakuganji and push his knowledge, the very last remnants of his being, onto another. Gojo is no exception to this. He should be no exception to this. Even though his life may have been lost battling Sukuna, what of his ideology? What of his mindset? What of his impact? What have the students that Gojo raised been entrusted with? A character who put it really well is Todo in Shibuya. As long as we live, our friends who have passed away will not truly have been defeated. These words rung true then, and they still ring true now. Gojo may have died, but he is not lost to Sukuna, and he won't unless every single thing that he stood for is erased and eviscerated completely. This isn't something that just Jujutsu Kaisen does either. Many anime and manga have a concept similar to this. Many stories in general introduce the idea of a character's entire being and essence having the ability to transcend the limits of death and pass on to the next generation. You may know it as the Will of Fire. You may know it as One for All. And in Jujutsu Kaisen, this concept is present and purposeful. This is the concept of a curse. Notice how with all the characters I mentioned in the series, their death was the end of something, but the beginning of another. For a sorcerer, for a cursed spirit, death isn't quite the end. Their very nature allows them to transcend the finite boundaries of existence and move beyond it so long as they have another to pass the curse onto. Mai dies in exchange for Maki's growth and the curse of destroying everything. Nanami dies and gives Yuji a sense of stability. Yuji dies and gives Megumi and Nobara a sense of motivation to grow stronger. And Gojo now dies, physically reaching the end of his lifespan, but spiritually transcending and existing in the hearts and minds of those he raised. Gojo could certainly return to the series. He could do what he did in Hidden Inventory. He could awaken again, defeat Sukuna, and have the story of Jujutsu Kaisen end just like that. But what of everything established in the narrative before that? What of the audience's ability to trust the manga's stakes? What purpose does Gojo's return really serve if in reality he never left to begin with? The body of Gojo Satoru has been killed, but the mindset and the impact has not. Yuta, Yuji, Megumi, Maki, Hikari, so long as these characters exist, so long as his students exist, so long as they perpetuate the ideas that Gojo taught to them, he isn't done yet. If this is the case, why then would we need to bring him back? Because it would be cool? Because he's done it before? I entirely understand the sentiment, and I've seen amazing, very heartfelt theories, videos, and even fan manga illustrating how he could come back and why it would make sense in the story. And while all of these are really well done, and some of them have actually made me shed a tear, I fundamentally disagree with the notion that Gojo needs to come back, because I fundamentally disagree with the idea that Gojo's physical death and departure from the series means that he is gone from the story impactfully for good. Unless Gojo were to return, unable to fight, unable to help, unable to be the strongest as he had before, he'd return only to hamper the growth of his students, the narrative, and the core themes of Jujutsu Kaisen. For as great of a character as Gojo is, for as strong as he is, for as impactful as he is, there comes a time where stepping out of the way and letting fate unfold is the only way to get results. It's the only way for his goal to be achieved. Sukuna may present himself as this undefeatable foe. Kenjaku's wisdom and planning might seem too great to overcome, and the odds are stacked against the cast in the worst ways possible, but Gojo trusted his students even in death. He trusted their judgment, he trusted their potential, and he trusted their mentality. This very trust was placed in them after he was sealed, and despite the many bumps along the way, Gojo's trust was shown to not be misplaced. The missing component to complete the student's journey is circumstance. It's a need. It's not Gojo. In fact, it's the very antithesis of his existence. If Yuta always has someone that he can rely on to save the day, if he always has someone that can step out on the battlefield before him, what need does he have to step up, to elevate his game, to awaken? Even for someone as talented as Gojo, the only reason he ever became the powerhouse that could hope to fight Sukuna is because against Toji, his back was against a wall. The only option was to fail and die or succeed and live. Now, not every character can surpass that wall. Not every sorcerer has the talent or mindset to do what Gojo did in that moment, but we'll never know who does and who doesn't if Gojo is always there to hold their hand, to keep them safe, to hinder them from that forced evolution. So in that sense, I think bringing Gojo back into the narrative wouldn't be the best idea. Bringing him back with the intention of defeating Sukuna only devalues all of his beliefs, the established narrative through line, and even the conflicts that our protagonists already have with Sukuna and Kenjaku. If Gojo were to come back and rob Yuji of his ability to face off and eventually defeat Ryoma and Sukuna, the entire setup for their climactic battle will have been for naught. Having him return as an actively useful fighter, as an actively useful and powerful sorcerer, only reaps inconsistent storytelling, incongruent messaging, and totally unsatisfying plot points for Jujutsu Kaisen moving forward. This only leaves the option of him coming back unable to fight, unable to clash with Sukuna, unable to maintain the role of the strongest. And this is something that I'm not as strongly opposed to. It still flies in the face of what has been established prior. It still flies in the face of the idea that these sorcerers live on even past their physical death. It's still redundant to have him return due to his ideals living onwards, but it doesn't inherently mean that there is no story to tell with this premise. If you have him return more powerful than ever, it feels cheap. It feels like Gege was pressured by the fans or pushed into a corner narratively to justify the defeat of antagonists that he just made too strong. However, if he returns as a former shell of himself, I think there are some interesting stories that can be told there, depending on where Gege thinks that he can go with it. What happens when someone who could do everything now isn't able to do anything? Would he still be the same carefree character he once was? Would he still be able to face the fact that he can't do anything to help and now must rely on others the way they relied on him? Would he be relieved or happy that he's finally free from the curse of his strength? Would he even be Gojo? The question that Geto posed before leaving could finally be answered in an explicit sense. Is he strong because he's Gojo, or was it his strength that made him Gojo? Genuinely speaking, there are some extremely interesting directions you can take a narrative like this, and I think All Might is a pretty good, or at least pretty interesting example of this concept being introduced into a story. Very similarly to Gojo, All Might's powers somewhat transcended the rest of his verse, and once he was unable to maintain that power, maintain his status as the symbol of peace, he went through an identity crisis of sorts. What is All Might if he isn't the #1 hero? Subsequently, the question would be asked, what is Gojo if he isn't the strongest? This journey would look different for Satoru, but the framework of a story told from his perspective could work. Theoretically, it could be very, very entertaining. The problem is that Jujutsu Kaisen isn't written like that. Gojo isn't written like that, and Gege just doesn't write like that. The only way I could see this panning out properly is if Gojo was somehow granted enough time in the story to fully process his new emotions and circumstances, as we, the audience, were able to sit with this new reality and watch it affect him over time. An entire character arc would need to be dedicated to Gojo in order to make this function properly, and I just don't see it happening. Both logistically and stylistically, I don't see that being a possibility for JJK. Not only are we in the midst of an absolute shitstorm of a situation that requires resolution to character arcs, not build up for new ones, but love it or hate it, Gege's always been rather brisk in the writing department. Slowing things down and letting characters sit with certain feelings and emotions is something that he doesn't do very often or consistently. And while you may not care for that writing quirk in particular, expecting him to do it with Gojo in the scenario I laid out just seems like hoping for the best, despite everything in the series saying otherwise. So asking Gege to put in all of this legwork now is just something that can only produce disappointment. Even if we did assume a willingness and ability to put in the time to set up an arc like this, the thematic hindrances would still stop this from being the best possible decision for Jujutsu Kaisen as a story. If for some reason Gege had to bring Gojo back, the washed up, far past his prime angle would be one of the few ways that I think Gojo's character isn't reduced to utter garbage, but it's still only the best of a generally bad decision. Everything I presented up to this point, this slow burn, fall from grace style arc, is an example of making the best out of a decision that I don't think is that great to begin with. I say that to say this: Gojo's death, good or bad, rushed or stalled, had an air of finality to it that can't be taken back without serious consequence. His fight with Sukuna is good. His ending scene is good. What that can mean to every single student that he helped along the way is beyond that. It's excellent. Gege's already provided a succinct conclusion for Gojo. Bringing him back and turning it into the right decision would require an even higher level of writing to justify it. It isn't impossible to attain this, but it wouldn't be easy either. I understand people's frustrations with Gojo's death. I understand the desire to have him back. I get the feeling of dissatisfaction that comes with thinking that a character had so much more potential, so much more room to grow, so much more in the tank that they could show you. But with Gojo, you still get to see all of that. You'll still get to witness his impact. It's just going to come in the form of his students' performance against Kenjaku and Sukuna. The villains that Gojo himself couldn't overcome, his students will, and everything that Gojo had been working towards since his teens will all come full circle and show just how right he really was in the end. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and want to see more analysis like this from me, check out this Sukuna vs Gojo video, or this video where I compare Gojo and Aizen's character arcs and compare them. Subscribe and hit the bell, and let me know if you think Gojo should come back down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.